So now, is it an official Trump coin? Like, what does that mean?
The best part is that, I didn't make $1 from this. Barron's made $50 million from it. He kind of left me in the lurch here. I mean, there's still crazy people out there that think you and I are making everything up. But about half of them are deplorables.
Yeah, but I love I'm fine with deplorables. But they're supposed to be on our side. They donated their whole life savings. They said, every dollar I have, I bet on this. I'm like, well, I don't believe it, one. And number two, that sounds like a you problem.
Should have thought that through, yeah.
The news that I reported on through Firewires at the time was correct. You're welcome. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the pod. A little bit switched up this morning. We've got, first of all, Matt in the hot seat today. So this is producer Matt. I mean, I shout out Matt all the time. I'm always demanding he go and get me a clip or fix something. You're finally getting to meet the man, the myth, the legend. The reason Matt's in the hot seat is because everybody else is fucking out of town. Firewires is going on break. We're the last ones left. We have to, before the rest of this episode, which we recorded yesterday, we obviously have to talk about last night's unbelievable debate. And I can't do that alone. I need my boy Matt to help me out, just guide me through it. I just, before we get to it, we're off next week. Any other updates, Matt? It's we're off next week. We have a whole episode coming up. We've got Shkreli on the pod. We've got Delian on the pod this week. Huge monster episode. And now the debate recap. I think I was taking notes for this. I was taking notes, going through points and positions, and somewhere, 10 minutes in, I realized this is useless because the debate is not about these issues. I have to start with an apology. My take the other day, and something I say a lot, is debates are meaningless. They're pointless. They're useless. They're more about rhetoric than positions. They're never meaningful, and we should probably just get rid of them. Genuinely, I think a 3-hour Rogan conversation, or really a conversation on Pirate Wires, hit me up, would be more useful. Just uninterrupted, a meandering talk through policy issues and things. So you can really get to know somebody. The mechanics of this debate, I was like, there's no way. It's CNN's involved. They're going to be clamping down on the mic thing. I thought Trump would be fine in that format, but overall, because he's a performer and he can, he cracks any medium. That's what he does. It's separate from his policy positions or him as a president, you cannot deny that he's a savant level entertainer. So he was always going to thrive no matter what the medium was. But I just didn't think we'd get anything important out of this debate. I thought we'd walk away and everybody would sort of declare victory and nothing would matter, and we'd move on as if it never happened. I'd have some fun tweets, whatever. No, what happened instead was we had, I think, the first meaningful presidential debate in my entire life. Maybe there was one back decades and decades ago that I don't know. I maybe the Nixon Kennedy debate because it heralded in a new era of debate. It was a medium shift. That's interesting. What we saw last night was a man who was so in Joe Biden, so mentally not there, right? So degraded, so obviously senile, that we should not even be discussing the new primary or whatever, who's going to be his replacement, which is now the sort of DNC discussion. It's how are we going to get rid of this person who's clearly mentally unwell? We should be discussing the 25th Amendment. We don't have a president right now. He's not mentally there. 2 minutes into it, I look over, I had a friend with me in the room while I was watching and tweeting and stuff. And I just want a quick check-in with him. He's kind of not super online, more of a moderate on all of this stuff. And I just said, yo, this is crazy, right? Or is it crazy? What am I seeing here? And he's like, this is fucking crazy. He seemed to forget where he was. He lost his train of thought on every single question. He couldn't make a single point. He fumbled and mumbled through everything. Dude, bro, what was your take? I don't even really know what to say other than listen, the facts are he's mentally unwell. I don't know how he will be running for president. I think there's almost no chance at this point. Every single Democratic operative is in sort of red alert status right now. Everybody is talking about what happens now that the Democrats have dodged an entire primary season, and there's going to be some weird like backroom machine. We're going to learn all sorts of new rules, I'm sure, in the next coming weeks, like weird rules we never knew existed, that they'll be like, oh, you're an idiot for never knowing this existed. Obviously, we can just select Gavin Newsom. It'll be some strange shit like that. But their democracy from the Democratic Party has been averted. I think that there has to be a new candidate. If there's not, I mean, that's inconceivable to me. I guess that's just inconceivable to me. I think he's not going to be the president. Or the presidential candidate.
Yeah, there has to be. I slacked last night. I was like, I'm just sad. Like, legitimately sad. I doom scroll Twitter. I was like, it's one of the few times on Twitter that everyone agrees on an actual opinion. Even CNN and MSNBC were having their like funeral last night for Biden. And it's pathetic. I was like, this is really, really fucking pathetic. And, naively, I think we both went into it. I had some questions organized. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to ask him this question about this. We didn't get to the fucking issues.
No.
It was, and
I mean, they answered some questions. It was cool to see. I liked hearing.
But we're not talking about that today,
right?
No one's talking about it.
They
talk about issues. They talk about fucking golf, but like no one's talking about that. Everyone's talking about some bullshit about, he's unfit to be president. And you thought maybe they drug him up enough, like when he does the State of the Union. So I think naively, that's how we thought we get your usual sort of copy and paste debate. But he couldn't even do that.
No, and I think. There's a question, obviously, that you have to be asking yourself at this point, which if you just saw the performance, which was unlike anything I've ever seen, like humiliating for the country, I would say, yeah. not only for him, but for all of us on a world stage. Yep. I thought that, Trump's a clown. I'm like, he's a kind of clown entertainer, reality television star running for president in 2016. Like that was sort of like, oh God, what are we doing here? And then you grow to evolve your opinion on Trump based on what's happening in the world. You have Kamala Harris giggling over, falling out of a coconut tree or whatever. You're like, what the fuck is going on? This is embarrassing. This is the worst one. This is like, and it's bad in a classic sort of way, which is just, we are not capable of defending ourselves right now. He is not the commander in chief. And so, yeah, it was totally humiliating. And you have to ask yourself this question of, well, there's no way that his handlers, which he definitely has, didn't know this and haven't known this for months and months and months and months, including all throughout last year when there was an opportunity for primary. So all of the pieces start snapping together. And this is now increasingly, and I saw Paul Graham going after Balaji for this, kind of accusing him of like conspiracy theory and dangerous ideas. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is very, very fucking obvious that the DNC wanted to avoid a messy primary, a messy, chaotic primary, which is why they pretended he was well and then moved the debates. And now there's just enough time for us before the Democratic convention this summer to choose a new candidate. They're just going to put him right in. And I do think it was, I don't know if Biden was involved in this decision-making process. My sense is probably not. My sense is he's not making many decisions at all right now. But I do think that he was not put on stage with any sense by anybody who knew him that he was going to do okay. I think that they knew it was going to be a complete disaster, that the entire country was going to be shocked to the point that they would accept the Democrats once again, because back they did this with Bernie Sanders as well, once again fucking a primary, totally bypassing the democratic process and just picking somebody. But this is, much more egregious than what happened with Hillary. This is really so separate from the fact that he is not mentally there. The story is that the Democrats are not democratic. This is like mob party shit. I gotta say I'm shocked. Like I knew he was bad. I've said it. He was bad, and I would get sort of frustrated.
Couldn't walk off the stage. He couldn't even walk off the fucking stage.
From the shuffle, Jesus. The very first step, I was like, "Oh no, this is way worse than I thought." And I mean, I thought it was bad. We would get attacked. Oh, you're just being a partisan hack, whatever. And I'm like, I mean, he seems senile to me, and whatever. I guess we'll see. Of course, I don't have any sources close to the president. I had no idea that it was this bad, that it had degraded to this point. And I think that today, really, and you see like Matt Yglesias and who's that asshole from MSNBC, Joe Scarborough. The people are doing side-by-sides of commentary of theirs from just a couple of days ago, challenging anyone who said that the president was mentally unwell. The
New York Times
or
6 days ago.
The New York Times. Like, these people all knew better. a week ago, they did, and it was like, I want to say it was tactically stupid, but it wasn't, because I think that, like, for the machine Democrats, Scarborough's not that. Scarborough's just a clown on television. But Iglesias certainly is this, and the New York Times certainly is this. I think that they wanted, I don't think they're like part of a conspiracy. But I think that deep down, they didn't want a messy primary either. A messy primary with what's his face, the Kennedy involved, and probably Ocasio jumps in. Anything could have happened in a primary. They don't want that. Mm-hmm. They want some backroom shit where Gavin Newsom is anointed. And that's that. And I do think it's that. Here, I'm not confident in my prediction. We are in uncharted territory. I'm very confident that Biden won't be running, because why would you? He's not only going to lose, he's a danger to every other Democrat on the ticket with him. So I don't see a world in which they're able to keep him on at this point.
The cope I'm reading this morning is that you vote for administration, not the president. I'm like, they're just trying everything they can.
Well, with Biden, I mean, that's always been true, right? Yeah, you're voting for the deep state. You're voting for
exactly.
You're voting for the machine.
Better.
You're voting for the machine around him that's been propping him up, for years and years and years, the administrative state. And that's a whole other, if the idea that they are in this much control, I say I'm sounding spooky, my tinfoil hat's on. But it's just like, this is a conspiracy. I think there was a conspiracy to circumvent a primary in order to have control over the selection process now. I think maybe there was a chance that Biden could go, and they were like, whatever, like, give it a shot, Joe. And he just crashed and burned in a manner I've never seen. I was watching on CNN. So the moment that it ended, all the panelists came on, and they were just like, this is a fucking disaster. There's never been a disaster like this.
Van Jones is about to cry. Like, John King is all saying that it's a mess. Joy Reid on MSNBC was like, I was talking to people, like, Jesus Christ, they went all in.
Yeah, every single channel. I mean, they've tried to throw in stuff like, oh, well, Trump lied.
Trump that was the basic argument.
He was so nasty. He's never going to get suburban women when he's this nasty, and like, he needs those suburban women. And I'm like, I don't know that that's true, that he needs anybody right now. Needs like a certain contingent. He seems to be doing generally well. And then two, can you imagine being so sexist that you think a suburban woman's looking at the television right now and she's like, I better take the vegetable because that guy was a little bit mean on TV to the vegetable. I don't think so. Like, that's just not my sense.
Exactly.
Having been raised by a suburban woman, I can tell you that's not the way that she thinks. And that's not the way that any intelligent woman thinks. This is like we're in existential danger territory. And I also think there is some risk to the Democrats now, because separate from Biden, who I do think they're going to replace, which is sort of like, how dare you put the country in this position? This is an interesting vector for attack now that we've never seen before, because there's so many crazy developments happening behind the scenes that do feel conspiratorial and do feel anti-democratic and do feel like really a giant middle finger, not to Republicans, but first, obviously, to Republicans insofar that it's a middle finger to the country generally, but it's specifically a middle finger to the Democrats who are voting, who have no say in who their candidate is right now. That is, I think that it has to matter. And I don't know. I got to say, I thought this was going to be a boring. I suspected there was a chance that something like this. I did. I thought maybe he still drops out before the convention, but I don't. Mostly I didn't. Mostly I thought that we were signing up for a boring election.
Yeah, same.
And it's no longer boring. It is no longer boring. No. I can't believe I doubted Trump. I can't believe I doubted Trump was going to give us an exciting election. I really did. But here he is.
I retweeted the image of the band play on the Titanic. That's what it felt like last night. Something I keep coming back to this morning as I think about it. I'm just like, the years of gaslighting. Now that goes back to COVID, that goes back to inflation. And some of these obviously was under Trump, but like COVID, inflation, and now Biden's health. And like the videos that have been coming out the past couple of months. And like, sure, you can argue on the margins. They're sort of doctored for like, they sort of get edited for however your stance wants to be. So like, you think he shit his pants, but really he had trouble sitting down. But even if you just look at the video unedited, you go, that's an old man who like can't function properly.
Yep.
And the problem with so much the past couple of years, like, you know what's going on. You're a sentient, smart human being. You know what's going on, and you just keep getting told no, that's not what's happening. Inflation's not that bad. The president's great. And you're like, what? And like anyone who with like half a brain knows what's going on here. And it's just years of this. And it's so fucking tiring and disgusting and shameful. It's shameful. Like, you know, even you just watch like Gavin Newsom speak yesterday. He's not even that good. He's a terrible governor in California, but at least he's like can speak and he's like good on the mic.
The Gavin Newsom thing is, it's just every single interview. He's a surrogate for the president. They've brought in all these like younger, and by young I mean I think he's like close to 60. So he's not. None of these people are that young.
He looks great.
He's like comparatively young. But they're like bringing all these like the young people out to talk about how great Biden is in front of the cameras after Biden collapses post debate, because everyone knew that we all knew he was too tired to keep going after the debate, regardless of whatever this new, very clear and present danger version of mental calamity is, or mental degradation is. But they kept interviewing Newsom after, and they're like, you know, people are saying you're going to have to run now, and he's just like, that's outrageous, and you can just see like a little smile cracking, like he is just. A friend of mine tweeted a picture side by side of him and the Cheshire Cat, and she's like, I can't unsee it now, and it's like you could just see he's having the best night of his life. He's like, here it comes, gonna fucking house of cards my way into the Oval Office. Now's my time. Skipped a primary, going straight up against Trump. It's like it is. I mean, it makes you like not want to be into democracy, to be honest. It's like this, it's just degraded at this point where you're like,
bring back the king.
It's just like, we're ready. I'm ready for an adult to just like sort of like take over for a minute. I would love it if we could just have it for 4 years, like a 4-year king. And then it's got a timeline and he goes away, but we just need a second to like clean this shit up. But
remember we were told in 2020, we were told the adults are back in the room, and like none of that has been the case. I was told the adults are back.
Well,
no,
I mean, he's certainly, I feel like wasn't he born like before World War II or something? I mean, he had to have been. I don't know how old he is. He's like, this is an ancient man we're talking about. He's gone now. I feel a little bit bad for him, but then also I remember no one asked him to run for president. Well, I guess a lot of people asked him to run for president. But he was the president. And I mean, I felt bad even tweeting about it last night while I was watching. I genuinely did. I was like, I feel like I'm attacking this frail old guy. I saw these clips of him from when he was young, and he was a young senator, talking about one was Roe v. Wade, and then one was later it was crime. Republicans love to attack him for the predators comment. They're like, oh, you're calling black people super predators. He never did. He was talking about the problem of crime eloquently and correctly. And I was like, can I vote for that guy? Like that. He's like, we're cleaning up the streets. And I'm like, yes, thank you,
please,
sir.
Please.
And he was a different guy. Like, and he was already old when he was talking about predators. But before that, I mean, he's been in politics forever. And he wasn't, I don't believe he was always a bad guy. I think that this is a tragic end for someone who's
it's sad.
Tried for a long time, and I think it's like the people around him have a lot to answer for. But then again, I think it also is a strategy. So it's like to answer for what? They didn't do it by accident, or it's all on purpose. They're trying to get someone into the White House right now, and they think that this is the best strategy, which is crazed because they're supposed to be the party of norms. But I have not seen a normal thing out of that party for many, 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 many years.
You can't say democracy's on the ballot and not even have a primary. It's just like sneak a candidate in. Like you said, House of Cards, that's actually a great reference.
But they're going to keep doing it they're like, once they place a new guy in, we're going to go straight back to democracy. Got to save democracy. And I'm like, well, if this is democracy, if this is the definition of democracy, I'm not a fan. I'm open to alternatives. If this is what if democracy just means that a few mob bosses in DC get to select who our president is, I'm not interested in democracy. This is crazy. This is unacceptable. I think it's like there can be no tolerance of people now who are defending this. It's like it is so much worse than they brought up January 6th. That was a funny line, I will say. They brought up January 6th last night. And it's like, Trump has this, I forget the exact framing of the question, but it was like, sir, like let's talk about January 6th. He was like, let's talk about January 6th. The border looked great on January 6th. And I thought that was funny. I don't believe I do not believe there was a coup attempt. I don't believe that it was an insurrection. I believe it was a really messy riot, and Trump acted like a clown and could have done a lot better. But I think that calling it anything else is really ridiculous, especially while Nancy Pelosi is colluding with generals, discussing what orders to and to not obey while Trump is president, given some whatever set of circumstances. Like, they just have no ground whatsoever to be talking about coups or insurrections while the deep state is selecting who our next, well, I don't want to say the deep, listen, that's a little, maybe a little too far of a stretch for me. I think it's just like Democratic mob bosses who are making these decisions.
Hint, wink, wink. Yeah, I got you. I got what you're saying.
But I think, I just don't think that Trump is the danger here. I really don't after last night. Like, you got to really think about this. It's like the Alvin Bragg, the sort of fake show trials. It is, who actually led the coup attempt? Certainly not Trump. That wasn't, we had 6 months of riots that were, identical preceding January 6th all over the country. At one point they, on that January 6th question, after Trump knocked it out of the park with his diversion, he's sort of like, funny diversion, Biden was like, it's awful what you're defending. I'm not going to do it justice because it's sad to me. I don't want to like get into what I saw last night in terms of the like cadence of his speech, but he mentioned mobs of people crashing into buildings, breaking windows, knocking over statues. And I for a second, I was actually confused. I was like, is he talking about the BLM stuff? Like the 6 months that I was like locked in my apartment, while roving mobs looted and destroyed like the statues of our forefathers across the country, Grant being pushed over, shattered in the name of anti-racism. Like, it was a fucking cultural revolution, and it was horrifying. But no, he was talking about that one day. That was the one riot they weren't okay with. And I wasn't okay with it either. I wrote about it at the time. I'm against all of the riots. I don't like any of them. I've talked about it on this podcast multiple times. Like, there should be swift and very firm justice for all of the people who were rioting. But it wasn't a fucking coup attempt. That's not how our government works. You don't have to just like walk into the Capitol and stand at the podium and then you get to be the king. Like, what planet are we on? Ridiculous. But anyway, we have bigger problems now.
Yes, seriously.
That was the debate. It was wild. I was totally wrong. It was a meaningful debate. I think that we're watching history unfold right now. I can't imagine that something like this ever happens again in our lifetime. But then again, the rules of the clown world apply. So, I think for as long as the internet exists, reality is going to be very, very weird. And buckle up, I guess.
It's just sad. I mean, like I was thinking about like policy questions, and we didn't get to anything like that. It's just the sad state that we're in, and I don't know, man. I don't know where we go from here, but it's.
Well, I know where we go. We go to California. Gavin Newsom moved to San Francisco a couple weeks ago. Like, what was that all about? Why? Well, this is his home. He's moving back to his home. He's moving away from the seat of California government and to a more comfortable, friendly environment. Like, for what reason? Someone was pushing back against me online when I defended Balaji from Paul. And I was like, it's actually outrageous that you would deny something like a conspiracy on the DNC side. This is like COVID. This is like lab leak denialism at this point, I think. And someone, Megan McArdle, pushed back. She's like, no, it's really hard to do a primary and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, yes, it's hard. But why do you think Gavin Newsom had a debate with Ron DeSantis last year? You think he's running for governor of Florida? You think he just did it for fun or to what? Give DeSantis a boost in the primary race? No, of course there was a primary on the table. It's fucking ridiculous. It's ridiculous that we're denying this. It's just like absolutely absurd. That's clearly what was happening. And I'm outraged, but I've got to be honest. Like, I've got a lot to write about now.
Well, that's the good news.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. Like, we got a
content,
front row seats
baby.
of this like clown world chaos has returned, and we are on the front lines, my friends. Thanks for tuning in. We got a crazy show for you today with Shkreli. We're talking about like the meme coin. We're talking about TechCrunch randomly. We've got a whole thing on embryonic selection with Delian and Kian from Nucleus. It's gonna be a fun show. We're off again. We're off next week for 4th of July. Go watch some fireworks. Wish me happy birthday on the 1st of July.
Please do.
Still got some pieces coming out on Firewire, so make sure to subscribe to all of our newsletters to get all that great content, and catch you back in a couple weeks.
I'll see you guys for the next American disaster.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the pod. We have, honestly, an iconic guest with us today, the legendary Martin Shkreli, I think thoughtful autist. Perhaps, I mean, I'm looking at your autistic and lonely t-shirt, and I'm just kind of working with it. Sort of, to some, internet villain. We can unpack a little bit of that today. I don't think so. I think it's a complex question. But we're here to talk about a bunch of stuff. Martin is on for the whole episode. We have a bunch of topics to hit, and I think I'm going to start with one that you and I are kind of involved in together, and I think there's no way sort of not to sort of talk about this. Last week, we talked a bit about the Donald Trump coin, sort of the story and the controversy and all of that. I think this week, what I really want to talk about is this other, to me, quite interesting piece of this puzzle, which deals with betting markets in general. So while the Trump coin news was breaking by us, the betting markets got involved. And there was a question of, there are two big ones that I want to talk about. The first was like, is the DJT, is it real? I think was the framing of it. And I think that's a complicated question. Like what makes a meme coin real? And it's like that, there's more nuance there in my mind. The second question was, is Barron Trump involved? Which he was. So both of them resolved as no, which to me is incredibly controversial and calls a lot of the sort of fundamentals here into question. I will say UMA, which is the protocol that is used by what was used by Polymarket in this case on the sort of Barron Trump question in particular. Was he involved? This is like the vote. This is how people vote. So you have a bunch of sort of people online who are anonymously voting on the question. They're looking for a sort of preponderance of evidence before X date, and they said no. Which is sort of really disorienting for somebody who knows that's just not true. And it's further complicated by the question of like, were they betting on this themselves? There are other people who have now lost money for being right. UMA was sort of proudly announcing the decision, I would say. They kept kind of pile driving into it. They wouldn't just leave it alone. It was like, they were like, of course we're right. And like, fuck you for questioning it. They had just endless people online attacking everybody who was like, hey, wait a minute. You have no evidence that it didn't happen. It seems like I bet correctly. What is going on here? But Polymarket broke with them and sort of publicly denounced their decision. And I think that it seems to me like this is going to be a huge thing moving forward. I imagine there's probably some sort of firm break with UMA in general coming. And I think there has to be some reconceptualization of like, what kinds of questions are we allowed to not even allowed. What kind of questions are we capable of answering here? So brief primer, betting markets, we've talked about them before, but for people just sort of catching up, is Donald Trump going to win the election? Straightforward case. Yes or no. People bet, they make their predictions, and it's just like, it's straight up gambling. I think it's interesting. It adds a new layer onto reality for me. It's a new tool for sort of assessing how much people believe what they're saying. Do you believe this thing enough to put money down on it? That's an interesting piece of information. I think its scale, it's sort of still, we don't know quite how that's going to break down and reshape cultural conversations and things, but in general, I'm in favor of this new piece of information. But we did come to a point, here where it got more complicated. And Martin, you're sort of one of the central characters here, probably the central character at this point. I would love your perspective on this specifically, like the sort of conceptual piece. What are these betting markets capable of doing? And then also just narrowly, what are your thoughts on UMA?
Yeah, thanks for having me, by the way.
Thank you for coming.
Anytime. Obviously, markets are sort of information discounting machines. They've been doing that for really well for hundreds of years. A stock market is good at sort of predicting if a company is going to be successful in the future because lots of smart people, maybe like you and less so me, will go study the company and say, okay, this looks like a good company. Maybe this one isn't. And, you sort of have a market, whether that's private equity and venture capital like you do, or public companies like I used to do. Lots of people in a room can kind of generally get it right. Now, I think that taking that and applying it to other things is a good idea. I do think that stuff like, who will the president be? It wasn't surprising to see the very famous, pollster sort of arrive at the same conclusion as Polymarket for presidential odds. A lot of people thought that was kind of like art imitating science, or science kind of following art, or whatever. And I think that's pretty accurate. But the problem becomes like, well, what kind of things can you apply this to? Are markets good for everything? Can markets be determined to say whether or not your shirt is ugly? Like that's really not kind of great, because there's subjective opinions, and some experts will say, no, that's a wonderful shirt. And if the crowd says, no, it's terrible, well, who are you siding with? Who's right? And I think markets just don't have that ability to solve everything. And in this case, you have this like very basically irrelevant thing, like, did this guy make a meme coin? I understand this guy is the president's son, but still, something that's basically irrelevant. It's not about, something that'll ever move billions of dollars or something like that. So you're really trying to like force these tools to apply to things that are really kind of micro markets or irrelevant. And I think whenever you do that, as you know, in the financial markets, these really small markets are more inefficient than, say, the bigger market for like an Apple or whatever. When you get to these really small markets, you can get it wildly wrong. For example, when Stripe, sold common stock at $5 million, pre-money, they got it wrong. They should have sold it for a lot more, and the guy that bought got it really right. And obviously, the opposite has happened with all of our bad investments in the world, where we should have never done it, but we had a mispricing. And Apple, your chance of mispricing Apple is very, very small in the public markets. So, I think that when you apply them to really, really small markets, you're going to get that massive kind of inability to get the right answer, because one, nobody cares. There's not enough people to actually put enough money into a market this small to actually care enough to get the good market outcome. For that, you need time and you need money. And you sort of missed both here, where Polymarket had a very short duration bet. And over the long haul, even a small market will probably resolve correctly if it's got time for players to come in and say, wait a second, I studied this. I looked at all the evidence. I didn't have time on Monday because I had a business meeting, but on Tuesday, I started my research, right. And on Friday, I figured it out. They wanted this done in like 24 hours. And that leads to a ton of issues.
Yeah, I think that if you'd framed it slightly different and you'd said just, will Barron Trump talk about it by Friday? Will Barron Trump admit something or deny something by Friday? That is very easy to prove. But to say like, is it true by Friday, it feels honestly, well, I don't want to throw any crazy words out there, but it certainly doesn't work. And even if Barron Trump in that week, in a few days, had come out and said, I wasn't involved, what would that have proven? That wouldn't have proven anything if he said he was not involved, not in my mind, because I know that he was involved. So whose word do you take at that point? And like that just obviously proves, I think, that this specific kind of question that is, you mentioned, I heard you on Spaces last night talking about this. You talked about like, is the dress pretty or not? That's an even obviously an even stupider example that should never happen. This one is a little bit less nuanced, but still just like, how do you prove these things in court? Like on a murder trial, right? There's not an obvious answer to this. Like you're weighing evidence and deciding. So it's like interesting to know what the market thought, but if there's no answer here, then it's ultimately not a very meaningful question to ask. Like if there's not an answer that they can actually answer, and they weren't. I was in this very surreal place where it was like, hundreds, or maybe I have no idea, many people were voting, of people who don't know anything about this were deciding what they thought about what I knew for sure based on vibes, I guess, like just genuinely like the overall vibe. And certainly I don't think that I was really a big part of it. I think it was really you. It was like a referendum on you. Like, do I like Martin or not?
Right.
And the resolution was no. And and that is not useful to me. Like that, and it's certainly not. I mean, maybe if it was like, if polled, will most people say they don't like Martin? Or I don't even know. I don't know. This is stupid stuff. But anyway, yeah, conceptually, I think there's a flaw there. I'm excited to see how it's patched up.
Yeah, I think the UMA people were actually like, you could see that they had a sort of, bias here, like the way they tweeted about it and stuff like that. They wanted
an interest. Weren't they betting also on Polymarket?
I don't know what they did.
and I want to be careful about that. But I do know that their tweets and messages and stuff like that were all like, we want this to be true. It's obviously true in terms of me not being involved in that. I'm sorry, Baron not being involved in that. I made it up. They were like, we're sure that this is the case. This guy's such a bad guy. And it's just something that we know what happened. They don't. And to vote on something that you weren't there for is just bizarre. And this is why media, needs to be trusted. It's actually an important institution. And that, a lot of people in the right wing want media to crumble because we hate them and they tell lies. But when you read the Wall Street Journal and the Wall Street Journal says, oh, Microsoft is in talks to buy Activision, you believe it because somebody at the Wall Street Journal doesn't want to get fired. They don't want to just put that down and pretend that it happened. And some editors looking at it and saying, hey, John, before we run the story, who'd you talk to at Microsoft? And, I talked to Satya. Oh, yeah, can you send me that? Or maybe I can verify it from somebody else. You don't want to just run with something without sort of having researched it. And I think people know you and your reputation and your access to information. And you would never do that. And even on just me and Baron sort of telling you about what we were up to, I think even that alone isn't enough. That we pitched around 50 people, and you talked to some of those people, I bet. So ultimately, it's just kind of insane to me. It was surreal, and partially kind of resulted in me acting a little bit like surprised and like, well, you guys are really crazy, aren't you?
Well, and also your reputation is on the line. Clearly, like you've gone through a lot. You have a certain kind of reputation online. You know that if this is framed as you're lying about something and doing a scam thing, it's over forever. Like you have a lot at stake. I understand that. To be clear, I've talked to many people, and I'm not going to reveal them because, Martin, you kind of announced that you had talked to me, and so I was happy to sort of speak about that. But I'm not quite. If someone firmly denies something that I reported who was involved in this, then
there's still crazy people out there that think you and I are making everything up. It is really insane.
The thing that bothers me, so one piece, and I would love your perspective on this too, Sanjana, the one piece that I thought was like much more easy to sort of tackle, and it's going to lead into our next topic, which is fucking TechCrunch. There are other betting markets, and they're all shilling their market right now. And so Poly, I think I love Poly Market, just full disclosure, and also Founders Fund invested in them, and like I love the guys over there. But they're a bunch, and they were so like, we're running this thing, and only reputable news sources. It's like Fox News or CNN, like not pirate wires and like Solana, and that just begs it puts to the forefront now a kind of classic question that we've been grappling with for many years at this point, which is like, what makes them better than us? Why do you have to work for the New York Times for your opinion as a journalist to matter? For like, it's just trust based. They get things wrong all the time. I don't trust them, and that is like very frustrating to me that we're having this question again now with people who are supposed to be like, I don't expect that from the DGen community, like online, like shit posting Pepe the Frog in their image, and they're like, well, you better get a New York Times source. That's crazy. What? Like, what are we doing here? Go ahead, Martin. What do you think about that? Cassandra's having technical difficulties.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you and I both learned a little bit about crypto Twitter is that you've got like this subset of crypto Twitter that's really smart. Whether that's Charlie Noyce or like Joey, who you work with, or like whoever. Yeah. Like there's some real geniuses out there that are talking about crypto and the reality of it. But I think most of crypto Twitter, and then there's sort of I'm being Hillary Clinton right now. I'm talking about deplorables. But about half of them are deplorables. And,
yeah, but I love I'm fine with deplorables. Like, but they're supposed to be on our side.
They're actually deplorable though, unlike the deplorables that we like. They're the 40% of the deplorables we like, and the 50% are deplorables we don't like, because they're literally just people that have gotten like, they're so either zinned or Adderalled out of their mind that they want instant gratification. They can't think logically. They look at something and shoot from the hip. They don't want to believe something that doesn't feel right to them. And so what everybody did here is they said, post-proof. And I said, well, this is pretty uncomfortable. It's the president's son.
It's bridge hurting. Do you understand? It's like, who's going to give you information? Who's going to trust me ever again? If I'm like, the second I get into a bind online, I'm like, well, here's everyone I talked to. Here are their names. Go hound them. And then it drags them. Like there are people who I think at this point, people know are involved. There are many who nobody has even mentioned, like very prominent people.
We don't want
people whose name you will know. And I'm like, I'm not going to give you that. In a fucking million years, some random anonymous, degenerate, like schizophrenic child, probably a 13-year-old, is telling me to tell them who, like, never.
And
Why?
They've got $500 on some shitcoin or something like that, and it's
No, Martin. They donated their whole life savings. They said every dollar I have, I bet on this. I'm like, well, I don't believe it. One, and number two, that sounds like a you problem.
Should have thought that through. Yeah, I mean, I do think that that's right, and ultimately, that's what the role media has to play. Is that we have to trust the media, and if you don't trust some media, you can trust others, and at the very least, you could take with a grain of salt. I might not fully trust the New York Times, but if they're saying Biden considers firing, HHS director, he's probably considering it. I mean, it could be a plant, it could be fake, but whether it happens or not, you have to make your own judgment. You have to use the information. And what's funny about this is the whole crypto Twitter said, Martin, we don't believe you. You're making this all up. You're going back to jail. And I said, cool. What should I do? They said, post proof. So I posted the proof, and they said, Martin, it's so terrible of you to take advantage of Barron Trump like that. I'm just sitting there like...
Yeah, you were both taking advantage of him, and he wasn't involved. Both things are true at the same time.
And the best part is that, I didn't make a dollar from this. Barron's made $50 million from it. He kind of left me in the lurch here, having to defend this and defend myself. And I love Barron, but ultimately it put me in a really uncomfortable position. So now, the accusations are, we know you guys made this, but you coerced him by giving him and making him $50 million. Because he's just a child. He's 18. He doesn't know anything. And I'm just sitting here like, you people are fucking crazy. And I think your instant reaction to all this was, I'd never want to report a crypto again. Like,
yeah,
these people
I wanted out. I was like, how do I get out of it now? How do I build a time machine and never touch this? It's like, I don't regret. Like, people's assumption is like, oh, he doesn't want to get involved because he's in hot. Well, I'm right about everything. There's nothing that I said that wasn't true at the time, and so now, is it an official Trump coin? Like, what does that mean? It would require Trump to, I guess, announce it or something. Like the news that I reported on through Firewires at the time was correct. You're welcome. I want to talk about TechCrunch, though. This is a mainstream media source. TechCrunch is this interesting. Martin, I don't know how plugged into sort of dumb tech news you are. Okay,
oh, yeah.
So we're caught up to speed. TechCrunch, I don't know, 13 years ago when I started working for Founders Fund, was this kind of like embarrassing, like silly. They were like the Crunchy Awards. They're giving awards out to startup founders, and like they have a whole stable of people who are just writing stories though about startups. Like weirdly, not that I don't think that biased. Just almost like press releases. Just like this company exists. They are trying to do X, Y, and Z. They were funded by whoever. It was like this era of tech that was kind of rah, like, yay, startups, we're going to build companies, change the world, which we all like rolled our eyes about at the time, but in hindsight was like really kind of charming and sweet and like a nice time to be in tech. It was actually very exciting. A lot of companies did change the world, reshaped our entire reality that were built during that time.
Theranos, all kinds of great...
Theranos at the top of the list. That one had nothing to do with us.
TechCrunch.
But it was I don't know, it was a nice era. Now media changed pretty sharply in like 2014, 2015 especially, and then 2016 once Trump won, it was over. TechCrunch ceased to make sense in that world, and they pivoted and tried to be like nastier, and it like didn't work, and they kind of fell off. They were no longer relevant. They continued to be sort of goofy but not relevant, and just recently, I don't know if you could say they're relevant anymore, but they're at least interesting because they've become sort of like unhinged, like sort of psychotic, I would say, even to a certain extent. The first time I picked up on this, there's this writer, Ala something or other. She's their space reporter. I don't even know okay. She tweeted about a new defense technology company that made it almost impossible for a soldier to miss. And she was like, this is, she framed it as a horrifying, just tech dystopia type thing. And I thought, it's horrifying that American soldiers are they're like less likely to die. It was a crazy framing that you maybe give a pat. You're like, this is like just some stupid woke white woman thing. Like you get used to these sort of takes. You even sort of get used to them from the press. It's weird from TechCrunch because they used to be the sort of like yay technology firm or press outlet but whatever. The same woman now, Boeing had a failure in space that resulted in a huge delay for astronauts who are sort of like stuck in space. The story's not that bad, but it's funny, and Boeing is sort of couched in this, the disaster is sort of couched in this series of disasters. Boeing is sort of famously terrifying right now. Like, do you want to ride on it? I don't necessarily, if I had an option not to. She went after John Coogan, a colleague of mine, for just like John was like sort of laughing about this, and she was like, oh, that feel where you want to like trash Boeing so bad that you throw some astronauts under the bus. And she sort of defended, she's now taking up for Boeing over SpaceX, right? So now you're defending like this huge like prime over a startup as the space reporter for TechCrunch.
By the way,
headlines.
Boeing's the biggest defense contractor in the world. They make bombs and missiles. They're trying to hit their targets too.
Yeah, but don't come for Boeing. Don't you dare come for Boeing. Then it's like there was an AI question. Headline just popped up. It was TechCrunch rooting for an AI bloodbath, the AI bloodbath that we need. And then finally, it was this MEI attack. So Alex Wang of Scale sort of, I don't want to say famously, because like everyone was just like, yes, and it didn't do this like crazy news thing. It wasn't that controversial. People are pretty much on board at this point. But he denounced DEI.
On board with meritocracy, definitely.
Yes, he's like, my company is not. We're not hiring based on sex or race. Obviously, you have this huge hit piece comes out of TechCrunch. It was quieter beyond that, but I think there's another one coming. Actually, we'll end up inevitably talking about it. But it was weirdly quiet except for them. And it puts them in this interesting position of sort of no longer being goofy and irrelevant, but being sort of nasty and insane, which makes them more interesting, I think. Like, I actually think that they're just playing in the market here. And I encourage them to keep going because it gives me something to be mad about, which I'm going to be honest, sometimes enjoy on occasion. What do you guys make of the sort of TechCrunch evolution? I want to start with Sanjna, just in case your internet goes out again.
I mean, I think I'm like entertained by them, and I'm glad that they're doing something that's different than just the kind of, I don't know, like sort of predictable, stupid reporting that places like Wired put out, which is just, they kind of hate, they're techno pessimists, but it's all sort of written in the same GPT generated style. I mean, they're taking at least a position, I guess, that's kind of, I don't know, controversial. And it's nice to have as someone who's part of a media company, that I think we sort of wear our bias on our sleeves in many ways in our reporting. And we're not, in no way are we doing kind of impartial. Well, sometimes we're doing, we're doing a lot of fact-based reporting, but it's not, I don't think, impartial. It's nice to have a kind of caricature like enemy, I guess, in TechCrunch, but I don't know how consequential their pieces are, because I don't really hear many people talk about stuff they read on TechCrunch recently, or like, I don't know how many sort of clicks and views and stuff.
Part of this is a macro change where people aren't really going to sites at all. They're seeing what they see online. And it's like, it comes down to the question of, well, where do you get your news online? And because links don't share well at all on any of the platforms, it's basically like, what influencer told you about what story they're either mad about or excited about at a place, and then maybe you go and find it, but usually you're just talking about the headline.
I think what's happening, there are a few things to say about this. The first is that the diaspora of journalists from like Vice and these other places that have closed down or shrunk dramatically, they have to go somewhere. And a lot of these folks decided to learn some Python and stop being journalists, but some of them decided that they wanted to stay in the career. And they've moved to places like TechCrunch where they weren't before. So if you notice, where do the journalists come from is pretty critical, and what they do just before this. And if they were in tech or something like that, that could kind of make sense. But a lot of these folks were just not even covering tech. Like, they were just like doing something else. They're covering women's issues or whatever it was, social issues or local issues for whoever. And now they're reporting on startups. And TechCrunch, I always thought, was the place where you announce a Series A financing or something like that. And you give them the exclusive, and they do an interview. And they say, so-and-so unveils $48 million financing with so-and-so, and it's just basically corporate PR. But, I think the idea that they want to bash the industry they're in is really interesting. I had to deal with this in pharma, where there's a outfit similar called Stat. And Stat is sitting there sort of crapping on me every day. And I was like, you understand that like every drug company, your revenue is drug company ads, paying Stat money to, get their name in Stat. But at the same time, you're writing about them and you kind of have to be careful to shit on them. So I think that's a really weird thing when the only TechCrunch ads they're going to get are, I think, people trying to recruit or sell tech software or whatever it is, any SaaS platform or something to users and readers of TechCrunch. That's the audience they have. So for them to sort of say, well, I want to see an AI bloodbath. Well, hold on a second. I got an AI company. I'm not going to advertise with your fucking thing if you're talking about wanting an AI bloodbath. So 20% of their revenue's gone there. And then defense tech sucks. Oh yeah, another 10%'s gone. So like, how many things are you going to crap on before all your advertisers say, hopefully you don't, cast a spell on my industry?
Yeah, I think a separate problem is the tech culture side, because you said, what AI company is going to want to advertise with them now? And the problem is that they will keep doing it. Like they actually will, they have everyone in tech has this really high tolerance for being spit on. And I've never understood that. You don't need to go to these places. I don't know how much you're even getting from them when it's like if TechCrunch is attracting this hugely hateful audience that hates AI and hates tech conceptually, then like, what good is it to advertise those things there? I don't know. I don't know like just practically why they would do it. And then I don't know just like, I'm willing to sort of take practical hits all the time to sort of take down an enemy. I don't know, like it doesn't make sense on either one of those points. And I wish that tech people would grow a little bit of a spine here because
totally.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, as you know, there's one sort of PR genius out there right now named Lulu. And Lulu Chang is kind of the go-to person for anything PR related. And, she's been shitting on TechCrunch, lately and saying, why would you ever go to these guys? And, the problem that exists in the world is there's only one Lulu. And there's 50,000 other PR people who would advise you like, oh, okay, you're going to pay our firm $50,000 retainer, and I'm going to sit you down with the TechCrunch reporter. You're going to tell them your story, and they're going to write about you, and it's going to go great. And it's really kind of cringy because there's this symbiotic relationship between the PR consultants and the reporters, and eventually, I think the reporters want to still bring their bias in from their last job at Vice or wherever, BuzzFeed, where they were, saying, can you believe Donald Trump said X? And they kind of feel confined in this environment there. There's only one thing they get, which is, go ahead, power from their institution.
Well, I would say on the bias question, because I think the bias thing is interesting. And as Sanjana mentioned earlier, like we sort of wear our bias on our sleeve. And that's not to say that like our facts-based reporting is facts-based reporting, but our perspective, I think, is important for how you navigate the way that we're looking at the world or something. And everybody has a bias is the thing that we're actually saying there. Like the New York Times has a bias. Certainly TechCrunch has a bias. What's obnoxious is when they say that they don't and then report things that are incorrect because of their bias. And I would say in this case, it's like the bias, you either use it as a tool or I think it's like they're having the sort of worst of all worlds here. They're pretending they're neutral, but they're clearly not. And that lack of neutrality is not helping them in a way that a voice elsewhere might. And the reason that's the case is because they all share the same voice. If every single other outlet other than Pirate Wires is like, we hate tech, then, and it's in the same sort of not interesting way. It's just like, it's bad. All business is bad. These people are bad. AI is bad. How many like, I'm thinking of a person who's not Peter, because he's the easiest one, and like, but how many like Peter Thiel is a blood-sucking vampire from hell stories do you need to read? Like the first one did it, and they can't let it go. Like who's reading this stuff? And I think not many people, because obviously the macro is really bad. Like they're all totally failing. Now they need subscription revenue, and they can't do that because nobody pays for things unless they really love them. And it turns out nobody ever. Certainly not enough people really loved this type of content. It just
that's right. And like the information, a place I don't exactly love, but they're actually one of the few places where people actually pay for the news because they're kind of a Wall Street Journal for tech. They get actual scoops, right? It's like they do actually get
scoops. I think, and I have a feeling this story is going to become bigger over the next couple of weeks. The information specifically, I think there is something amiss over there, shall we just say? And I don't have too much to talk about there, but like I got my ear to the ground on a couple of stories that have been some of the worst things I've heard over the last couple of years in media. I have to wait for these stories to actually come out, but it's
it's been people dealing with them, and so I don't know.
I think really quick one. Blockworks is this sort of like media thing for crypto, and they literally put out an editorial that said you're not supposed to vote for Trump because he's a bad dude, and basically no matter what his crypto policies are, and everyone is sitting there saying, do you understand how many of us are going to jail because of Joe Biden, and how many of us are being prosecuted, sued by the SEC? They want all our money, and you're sitting here with an editorial like, it's not so bad. Don't give up your principles. Vote for Biden and go to jail and stand with it. And the guy's like literally trying to destroy this industry. And the tone deafness of the reporters who are just coming from a different background, I think.
Yeah, for a long time, nobody else wrote about this stuff. And so you were sort of at the mercy of that. It's still a problem. There aren't many young writers. There's not a lot of money in media. The pickings are slim, but the good news is, like, if you are not a sociopath or sort of a dumb person who's going to attack the people that they're covering for no good reason, then you kind of have a little bit of an advantage in this space. Sanjay, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I think that ultimately it's the sort of cultural shift is going to have to come from, this transition to subscription-based revenue. And as we're saying, like, people, I think that's going to sort of cull the ranks of these bloated media companies. I mean, Vice falling is a harbinger of that, but I think that there's a lot of these kind of legacy companies that basically, had a big sort of surfeit during the rich ad years, and now are sort of slowly being culled. And I wouldn't be surprised if like several more of these kind of tech publications whose articles now basically just go viral for their like stupid headlines that people dunk on Twitter, things like that, and occasionally do have good reporting. I mean, to TechCrunch's credit, they do have some good reporters over there, and like I sometimes read some of their pieces and get information from them. But for the most part, my interaction with them as someone who's writing about San Francisco and covering sort of broadly tech related things and public policy is pretty minimal, which I think says something, I guess.
Says a lot, right? Yeah, you're right. That alone, just the fact that they're not really in the discourse anymore is the kiss of death for them. They're not doing subscriptions, so all they can do is attention. And if you're not clicking, like, what even are they? Okay, we are going to take a break from this conversation to loop in an interview that I just did a moment ago with Delian and Kian of Nucleus. We're going to talk about some embryo selection, genetics more broadly, and how to create a moon people race, which will be pretty interesting. When we come back from that little convo, we're hitting AOC, Bowman, and should there be asylum for foreign sociology graduates? Maybe, according to Donald Trump. We're right back. All right, so we are going to switch it up a little bit. I want to introduce two guests to the pod. We've got Kian Sadeghi of Nucleus, founder of Nucleus, and the one, the only Delian of Founders Fund. I was just saying before, I'm realizing, Delian, I don't hear your last name a lot. I know it, I can spell it. Don't think I can pronounce it, and I don't think I ever use it. It's like you're like the Madonna of Founders Fund, but it's Delian. So, dude, I want to talk. Kian, I want to start with you, and then we're going to get into sort of the funding history here, and then the controversy. I don't want to say your company's controversial, but there are controversies for us to talk about. Just tell me about Nucleus.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Solana. Well, the first thing is, everyone has DNA. DNA is the language of life, right? It shapes everything about us, from our disease risk as well to our trait dispositions, as we'll get into. There are two fundamental changes in genomics in the last 20 years or so that has basically allowed for the creation of Nucleus. The first is in the reading of DNA. The second is in the analysis of DNA. And we'll talk about some others, but those are the ones that most immediately affect Nucleus. Regarding the reading of DNA, to actually sequence the entire human genome, 6 billion DNA letters, it used to cost around $10 million per sample in 2006. Today, Nucleus can do that for around $399. So the first thing to know is that old DNA tests looked at small snippets of someone's DNA, maybe a single gene out of 20,000, maybe just a couple markers, right? Nucleus looks at all 100% of your DNA. So that's the first shift. The second shift is our ability to actually analyze this DNA. And the analysis layer has become much more sophisticated in the last 20 years as well. So now we can read all the DNA. And now we also know that diseases and traits are something called polygenic in nature. When we talk about polygenic, what that really means is they're not driven by a single variant in a gene, but instead the result of many DNA differences throughout the entire genome. So by employing basically these new polygenic models combined with classical genetic analysis, which looks for the presence or absence of DNA differences on a whole genome, you can basically provide people the most comprehensive assessment ever of their genetic risk for disease, as well as their disposition for traits. So that's what Nucleus does.
And so, but this is like when we talk about embryo selection, this is like you're applying a sort of like a polygenic risk score to embryos. No?
So we don't do IVF. We don't do anything on embryos. We do everything in adult humans. There is obviously interfacing with that, right? Like we can do preconception screening. So what you can do is basically at scale, you can sequence all, obviously, your children's DNA comes from the parents, right? So you can actually, simulate offspring from two parents' DNA, as well as you can do things like, see if they're carriers. So you could do mass. So you can think of it as like plugging in preconception screening, which is what Nucleus does do. That's coming out actually very soon. Plugging that in with an IVF clinic. So that is actually the integration that you want.
Got it. Sorry, I misunderstood based on when we were going back and forth on the emails before. So give me like the 10,000 foot down view. How are people using this?
So
how do you want to use this?
So that's a great question. So today genomics is pretty fragmented, right? So maybe there's like cancer tests, neurology tests, heart tests, preconception screening, pharmacogenomics, right? Like for some reason, well, not for some reason, for technological reasons, historically, genetics has been so fragmented. So you have different tests for different applications. There's actually around 70,000 genetic tests on the market today, which is pretty insane if you think about it, because we basically combine all those 70,000 tests into one. So Nucleus is building the kind of all-in-one whole genome platform. What that means is we can do on just one test for $399, we can do all heart disease related analysis. We can do all neurology screening analysis. You can do preconception screening, right? Which is basically what I described, to see if both parents are carriers for a condition. And if they are carriers, they should probably go to an IVF clinic, as I know we're going to talk about later, to make sure they don't pass on a very serious, debilitating monogenic disease to their offspring. Pharmacogenomics, how someone's genome actually shapes their drug response. People think of genetic testing today, especially consumer genetic testing, as frankly a gimmick. Does my pee smell like asparagus or something, right? Nucleus is the complete opposite of that.
I mean, I also want to know if my pee smells like asparagus. I like it all. I'm in favor of the entire column of strange things. We can get into each of those later or in a bit. Delian, what was it about this company that you liked? Like, what brought you guys together? And I would love to know sort of like, what about the space are you really interested in right now? And then why is Nucleus the one for you?
Yeah, I think even before sort of meeting sort of Kian, I'd had a interest in genomics, partially from a sort of broader sort of societal interest, that I think it's a sort of understudied area, but then also very specifically as I was starting to sort of plan my family and going through sort of genomic sequencing screening, ultimately sort of came to the conclusion that there were things that we wanted to basically sort of screen out of our sort of children in our embryos. And so while sort of Nucleus is today not focused on sort of embryos and focused on sort of whole genome sequencing sort of for adults, part of the limitations today in screening on embryos is that you have more limited, sort of data sets on, sort of how, whole genome data relates to phenotypic expression in human adults, right? Kian, sort of mentioned that historically a lot of the genomic analysis was done in these sort of single gene, light polygenic, sort of, gene, sort of risk scoring. But most of those data sets weren't based off of whole genome data sets. And so, for very strong, sort of single gene expressions, think like, probably by far the most popular is sort of BRCA, which is a breast cancer, sort of gene where it's, sort of single gene. That's very well characterized and well understood. But there may be other things that you want to screen out of your, sort of embryos where you you know the phenotype that you're trying to screen from the adult, but you don't really know yet what the sort of set of genes that affect it are. And really, the only way to build that up is to have sort of mass scale data sets of human phenotypes with their whole genome sets, and that just like doesn't exist today. Again, because so clinically that's not how it's used today, and so the only way to
technically
really
impossible. It was too expensive. It was way too expensive.
Yeah, way too expensive. And then even today, where it's cheap, it's not clinically relevant to like convince a 24-year-old to do whole genome sequencing, and then have them also record a bunch of phenotypic data. That's not clinically sort of relevant, but it is sort of like so insurance won't pay for that. But it is,
but
potentially
actually
relevant.
Is extremely consequential.
Yeah, but
I think Delian makes a great point.
Yeah, that data set is extremely consequential to building out the embryo data sets. It's extremely, sort of consequential to potential pharmaceutical development. But probably the only way to actually get that data is a direct-to-consumer, sort of application that has the healthy 24-year-olds doing, sort of whole genome sequencing. And so, I'd been, sort of perusing this idea space for a little while, and then sort of met Kian, I want to say like 2 years ago now, and I think I think the two things were sort of one, this is an idea that I'd already previously thought about, so I think literally in the midst of the pitch I was sort of pitching him back basically, and then the second was having also been a sort of 19-year-old dropout founder, sort of pursuing slightly less radical idea, but in the world of healthcare, sort of definitely felt like I was going through a little bit of a sort of deja vu when talking to Kian and his journey, which doesn't typically happen to me even with sort of super young founders. And so I think it was that sort of 1-2 punch kind of made it feel like a no-brainer even 15 minutes into the call.
I want to get you were just mentioning something a moment ago, Delian. It's a personal topic, so you can say we're not doing it if you don't want to, but did you and Nadia, you went through the process of testing beforehand before you guys had a kid?
I'll provide some light level of detail, and then hopefully my wife doesn't hate me for the level of detail that I provide. But we conceived our first child sort of naturally, which was maybe sort of more spur of the moment than anything. But even before conceiving him, we had actually previously gone through sort of a multitude of cycles to sort of create embryos, and then also used a polygenic sort of risk scoring startup called Genomic Prediction to do the some amount of, let's say, sort of screening on our embryos. I would say what's available today is, not what will be available, sort of a decade from today, obviously. And hopefully, companies like Kian's massively improve the data set so that, embryonic, sort of screening gets even more sophisticated. But there were a set of these sort of single gene markers that are able to be screened with today's technology that we wanted to basically, sort of screen out. Obviously, we kind of, sort of gambled with our first kid and just, sort of did it naturally. So, we care a decent amount about screening these out, not so much so, we don't have, obviously there's, things like Huntington's, et cetera, where we wouldn't have, sort of gambled on that. So we don't have anything that's like, sort of that severe. But yeah, we did go through that. And so I had a very, sort of, let's say, clinically relevant patient experience where, I had to go through, and I actually had to convince my IVF clinic to do this type of polygenic risk scoring and this type of genomic screening, and had to connect them actually with the, the startup that was doing that type of sequencing. So it was we were the first patient ever, and this is one of the top 4 IVF clinics in the entire United States. And I was the first person that ever pushed them on this. They, previously had a much more limited, sort of analysis partner.
And I think Delian brings a good point, Solana, in there, which is that there's still like a lot of resistance for polygenic scores, right? Even in adult populations, which is what we do, right? If you look at, there was an article written about us, and basically the head of the CDC.
By who? First, let's just name some names first. Who was it?
It's Undark Magazine, which is an MIT publication. They're very thoughtful, they're very rigorous, but they're also very wrong. Which is that they wrote basically a long essay about me, our chief scientific officer at Nucleus, discussing kind of polygenic scores. And one quote in there was from the Precision Genomics division of the CDC. It's some like interesting department name. And basically the head of the CDC, the head of this department said, there's no polygenic scores today that have any clinical utility. That's just like factually not true. I mean, breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, AMD, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's. I mean, I can go on, right? You have models that can predict equivalent to classical genetic analysis in terms of their predictive strength using just common DNA variants. So It's simply not true. And I think there's a theme throughout the genomic stack, right? And I think the thing is that, like, it's, if at first glance it might seem like, oh, like adult populations is very different than embryos, but actually it's all going to be very much integrated. When I talk about this all-in-one DNA test, you're going to see that everything's going to be integrated end-to-end in genomics. And to that point, I think, if you can't even give a polygenic score to adults today, right? Physicians aren't necessarily trained in it. There's obviously resistance from kind of the public health establishment. Different academics are kind of concerned people's understanding of probabilities, all these, and there's also a culture of kind of paternalism in healthcare as well. All these factors today that mean today that 24-year-old, that 25-year-old, that 26-year-old can't actually get what could actually be the most consequential piece of health information they could ever get in their entire lives. Because if you're actually going to prevent these conditions, you need to start early, you need to start young. So one of my favorites, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I wonder how much resistance there really is. People are it seems like enthusiastic about this when it comes to like 23andMe and stuff. I think that if you were just saying, hey, we're going to tell you if you have, Delian mentioned the BRCA one, like it seems like people do want this. So I guess I came in, I was going to ask a moment ago, do you think it's just this weird social pushback that you're receiving? But I don't, that doesn't feel right actually. It feels like people are actually willing to take the test.
Can I jump in, Kian? Give my perspective on it?
Go ahead, Delian. Go ahead. Yeah.
This is definitely part of the motivation in the investment, in that I think the thing that I hate about the current ecosystem, X Nucleus, is that they give analytical tools to consumers like 23andMe, and everybody's enthusiastic about it, but they purposely hide stuff from them. They don't trust consumers with the full analytical capabilities that are available in Nature papers. So if you're like a PhD scientist, your ability to like read into, hey, do I have a polygenic risk on potentially high cholesterol? Something as simple as that. There are data sets that you can go and look at that are like scientifically published, and companies like 23andMe and others don't release it to consumers because they're like, oh, well, consumers aren't sophisticated like us PhDs, or I think it's ethically wrong to like release this type of data. And so I don't like the fact that like, George Church, at Harvard has access to a certain set of analysis that he has to do, but, John Smith on Main Street is considered, too dumb, deplorable, et cetera. And so we can't possibly let him know the health information, because he's not sophisticated enough to interpret it. And so that was a lot of my, sort of frustration with this field.
I remember when I first got my DNA test, you're exactly right. It was like super, super limited. And you could actually like take your data to these like third parties and do this like janky version of it and find out all this other crazy shit. But I remember just really wanting to know, based on available data, what were my odds of, I don't know, a bunch of shit. I would have liked something. I like the genetic stuff, the sort of ancestry stuff is kind of cool, but it was cool to know how much Neanderthal I had in me. I felt like super accomplished. I'm at the 95th percentile or something.
Explains a lot.
I know. The funny thing about that though is like going in, I just assumed, I'm like, obviously anyone who has like a lot of Neanderthal DNA is a fucking idiot, right? You definitely want like as little of that as possible. And the moment that I got my results, I started thinking like they had those huge heads. Like I think it's like those are the ascended people for sure. It was like an immediate 180, and I wasn't conscious either. Like I caught myself doing it. But yeah, very Neanderthal, and I'm now like very pro Neanderthal in general, open to Neanderthal conspiracy theories.
Okay.
Do you think it's like, I mean, people, a lot of that's being held back probably just because of liability purposes, right? Like they don't want to take on the risk of telling someone, oh, you have X percentage chance of this, and then they get it anyway, and they're like, this is, the DNA. No, you think it's something else?
I know Delian and I are both turning our heads in exactly the same motion, like we're dancing together. I think it's people. Okay, I'm gonna try to explain this as best as how I view this. 23andMe, everyone's heard of 23andMe. 23andMe it's something called a SNP chip, so it looks at less than 0.1% of your DNA. So inherently, it's fundamentally limited in what you can tell people. What that means is like the analysis it gives you, any analysis it gives you is, even if they're like, oh, you're negative, you don't have something, it's extremely incomprehensive. So let's start with breast cancer. Delian mentioned BRCA, right? 23andMe for the longest time, they looked at 3 BRCA variants when there's actually more than 1,000 are known, for example. And not just in BRCA1, BRCA2, there's other genes as well. So if you look at these, across these genes, there's thousands of breast cancer associated DNA variants. 23andMe would look at 3 of them, right? which is obviously terrible, and now apply that to every disease they applied analysis for, and the fact that they don't provide polygenic scores. Historically, they didn't at all. Now they only provided a couple. It's actually still worse than nucleuses together. So we do this kind of old school analysis across every single human genome. So in other words, if you look at like a clinical genetic test today, say from like Myriad Genetics, there's this weird dichotomy where people like take 23andMe as like that's like the only genetic test in the world. Then they go to a hospital and get like a breast cancer test, an Alzheimer's test, a Parkinson's test, and somehow that's treated like so seriously, but then 23andMe isn't, right? Imagine you took the kind of clinical consequence of one of these Myriad tests, right, for a given disease, and then did that whole genome, so across the entire genome. So instead of looking at a single gene, you look at 20,000 genes, and then you also get the non-genic regions, so you can also run polygenic scores. So what I'm trying to say to you, Solana, is that like 23andMe is like, it's like a horse. It's like being like, oh, a horse versus autonomous vehicle. It's like, what are we even talking about here? It's like 20 years, nothing's changed, and I'm just like, what? Like, why are we talking about like, this doesn't make any sense. This is a garbage test. No one in medicine would take it seriously. No scientist would take it seriously. Then once you go from there, there's the ideological issue, which is the secondary issue. So first was the technology issue. There's the ideological issue, which you're kind of touching on, right? Which is like, why would 23andMe not provide analysis on something like intelligence, for example? Why would they not provide analysis on something like schizophrenia or other neuropsychiatric? Sorry, we have a chance to talk about it.
My sense about all of this is that is like the main thing that's holding us back. Is just like this sense that there are genes associated with intelligence among the sort of general population, and this feeling of like, it's just better if we don't know. It's just like socially better not to know. Like people don't want to fully know. And I do think that's what's holding people like the 23andMe thing back. I think there's also a religious piece. So let's talk about IVF for a second, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Solana. Go ahead.
One thing that I was going to say before you like move on to IVF, I think it's worth for the audience, like and Kian will be able to describe this probably better than I can, but like, it's not due to liability reasons. Like as long as you're not making, a sort of clinical assessment and you're just providing the data, but not saying a prescription of you should or should not go do these XYZ clinical things, you are not, sort of clinically liable. Obviously, Kian, maybe you can describe the like, sort of nuance there, but you can actually be pretty open on describing. Oh, good.
Yeah. Also, we're not diagnosing anyone. So Delian makes 2 points. One is that we're not giving any necessary, we're not a doctor, we're not a physician. We don't tell people what to do once they receive the information. They should go to genetic counselor, they should go to a physician for that information. Secondarily is that we're not diagnosing anyone. Even a BRCA variant is not a diagnosis. So that's something that's very important to remember.
When we apply this stuff to, obviously there are kind of two speeds on this. One is knowing yourself. And I think that's sort of closely related to like a prediction on what me and my partner, we have a kid, what are the probabilities there that we're looking at going into this? Then there's something more like, that's already controversial for many people. But I think that one's much less controversial. It is certainly much less controversial than the next one, which is a two-pronged one. Just the sort of increasingly, there's the concept of IVF. It seems to be becoming controversial. Certainly you have I believe it was the Baptist Church. They're anti-IVF now. That sets the tone for the religious right in America. It becomes politically important. The Republicans keep trying to say, no, we're not anti-IVF because I think they're terrified of fucking up the next election. IVF is it's popular on both sides of the aisle, right? Many people have kids that way. And you sort of, once you have a kid that way, you're like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, it's not controversial that my child exists. But you have Rep. Matt Rosendale came out just this week with, it wasn't like a bill to stop it or something. It was like a defunding suggestion, but it's like the first anti-IVF thing. Part of that is just religiously motivated in general in IVF. But then when it comes to selection, now we're talking about the question of like, what kinds of kids we're going to allow to exist is the framing. I think that would be like the negative framing that people are coming at this from. There is a lot of anxiety there. There are certain things that seem to be acceptable, watching for diseases. There are certain red lines that are absolutely not. And intelligence is certainly one of them. I would love to know how you guys are thinking about this sort of controversy generally, and as much perspective as you're willing to share on it. I feel like, Delian, you're going to be a little more, well, let's just see. Just, you know what? You guys just tell me what you think.
I think it'd just be, power to the people, basically. It's just, I have XYZ number of embryos that I create. Give me all of the scientific tools that are available to a PhD in a lab and let me make my decision basically on what I want to, sort of birth versus not. I think in some ways, this is like, sort of parallel to the, sort of power that you're given once the child is born, right? Like, I would like to choose, what medical treatments I give my child, and I'm going to choose to give him the polio vaccine because I don't want him to have a miserable life having polio. If I want to, sort of screen out, Huntington's disease or other things that I think will make their life miserable beforehand, that should also be, in the power of like the parents. And so, I tend to take, I think, a very sort of libertarian viewpoint here where like I may choose for a certain set of traits. Shaquille O'Neal may like fully optimize for height, and that's, entirely in his prerogative, and he wants to have like massive NBA babies. And other people may optimize for other things. And it's not to say that like, there should be some sort of like government societal wide, here are the types of babies that it should exist versus not. I think everybody should, sort of decide what kind of babies they want to have. And people are kind of already making that implicit decision by choosing which partner they have. And so people are already doing genetic screening of their kids by choosing a partner. What's the difference between that and basically just like once you're with the partner doing even further, more specific, basically screening?
Yeah, this is sort of the GMO debate. It's like, well, all of our food's been genetically modified. We're just picking up the pace.
Also, we've all been genetically modified. Like, we're not like the platypus that, came out of the water for the first time. We got modified a bunch of times, through evolution. I think we're in this unique point, sort of in human history where we obviously, sort of talked about, sort of Neanderthals, but, there was a whole set of, sort of subspecies within Homo, right? There was Homo erectus, obviously us Homo, sapiens. There's, sort of a multitude of those. We happen to be in this rare moment where like the Homo sapiens, sort of species happened to be the one that was, slightly more brutal, slightly smarter, actually slightly smaller than some of the other ones. And so that ended up, sort of dominating. We basically murdered all our other, sort of species. And I think we're in this like really rare sort of 10 to 20,000 year period where all humans will happen to be the same species. And then in the future, through evolutionary pressures, if there's, sort of a species of humans that lives on the moon, there's going to for sure be selective pressure on the moon. It's a totally different environment. There might be things that, in like lower gravity, naturally things that like, certain genes do better versus not. And so over the course of even like 1,000 years of the selective pressure of the moon, almost certainly humans will speciate. But then also these like artificial pressures, obviously, massively, sort of speed, sort of that up. And so I think we're in this, it'll be a very interesting, sort of societal moment when you are trying to maintain a basically like democratic republic, sort of civil society. And we're having such a hard time doing that today when we're all the same species, let alone like, 1,000 years from today when there's, Homo Martian, Homo Lunar, and whatever Homo Shaquille O'Neal.
This is a crazy way. This is a crazy way to defend the technology, though. It's like we're talking about speciation and like it's like we're creating like Lord of the Rings universe, right? We're gonna have like elves and
fuck yeah, man! You want pointy ears? Go get pointy ears. That sounds pretty sick. Like make yourself live forever and have pointy ears. Or Shaquille O'Neal is going to make a bunch of like 9-foot, ginormous, sort of, humans that are going to just like dominate at basketball.
Sanjay, go ahead, Kim.
No. I'd say one thing, which is that like, I think Delian makes some excellent points there. And I think just like today, if you look at the United States, there's around, 20 to 30 million people that have an inherited monogenic disease, 20 to 30 million. If you actually do population level whole genome sequencing, right? So if you do preconception screening with Nucleus, say, and then plug that into an IVF clinic, you could basically eradicate old diseases from the population in a couple of generations. So that's a very practical, tangible, real thing that affects everyone. I mean, obviously it should be up to the liberty of the parents, but I don't think most parents would want their kid to be unfortunately born with a very serious disease. I think with my cousin who suddenly died in her sleep at age 14. And I think, wow, like, if multiplication can stop that from happening, that seems like the single kind of most obvious preventive measure that obviously everyone in the United States should just swab their cheek and do. Right. So I think like Delian's right on the kind of like the super sci-fi vision of this, but also there's a very real, tangible, with the technology we have today, effect of companies like Nucleus Genomics.
I do have one last question here, and then we got to move on, unfortunately, because I have a ton of them. But what I'm going to ask is, we're talking about, here we are talking about, obviously, it's like the health stuff, ground floor. I get it.
It's ground floor, but it's not even being done yet. That's what's insane to me, right? Like, 20, right now, literally right now, Solana, there's millions of people in the United States that have a pathogenic variant, right, for breast cancer, colorectal cancer, high cholesterol. And, 750,000 people die a year from these conditions. Like, these are the number one killers, and greater than 90% of these people don't know they have a pathogenic variant. So like, we're talking about millions of lives are at stake over a swab. That's $399. I mean, how much is like, it's so like, I totally think we should talk sci-fi and kind of have the genetic stack, but like today I'm astonished that all these people who are trying to do quantified health, et cetera, they take like 20 vitamin C supplements. They don't have their genome sequenced, right? It doesn't make sense. So
I do wonder
think it's something that we need to be integrated in.
We fully know about some of these things. Some of them are really easy, right? Like cystic fibrosis is one gene, and it's like a knockout gene. So you could potentially like knock it out early on if you catch it or something.
It's a monogenic disease, yes.
So, but then some are more complicated. You have like multiple genes sort of working in tandem, and you sort of want to knock one out or two out, and who knows what else you're doing. Intelligence seems to be this way, where it's like it's clusters of things, and we're not entirely sure how it works. I guess just the last should be an easy question. It's just like, how do you think about second order effects? Like, are you a little bit nervous about what you don't know?
So I think about this in a lot of respects. So as you mentioned, a lot of these diseases and traits are polygenic in nature, right? And again, just so the audience understands, polygenic just refers to the fact that it's not driven by a single gene, but the complex interaction of many DNA differences or variants in someone's genome, which just means altered DNA. So what ends up happening is you can actually make predictions from these different variants without necessarily understanding the underlying causal mechanism, which has interesting implications for genome editing. I'm thinking about the ARC Institute's publication yesterday about the kind of evolution of CRISPR, and Patrick Shu, who's also an investor in Nucleus's work there. But that we can put that to the side for a second. Go back to your question, which is that what you find is that like what scientists basically do is they measure how much the variation in a specific trait like intelligence could be maximally attributed to genetics, right? So across every disease and every trait, they map a certain number. Intuitively, height. Height, basically scientists estimate that 80% of height can be attributed to genetics, right? So ideally, if you build a kind of perfect genetic model, there would still be 20% unaccounted for. Intelligence is estimated around 50%, right? So if you build the perfect genetic model, you get to 50%, then environment kicks in. So that's one thing to consider, which is that even if you build perfect genetic models, there would still be, obviously, there's still some degree of free will and environmental effects. That goes without saying. Moreover, I would think the thing to consider is that there, to your point of kind of unknown unknowns, is that, certain genetic variants are associated with more than one thing. So like take intelligence, for example, implicitly, as you optimize for, someone's intelligence, you're also optimizing for autism, right? These things are associated at the genetic level, right? They don't just have a single effect on a specific, a trait. So that's another implication, which is if parents all go and say, oh, I want my kid to be super intelligent, they should have the right and the sovereignty to potentially do that. Obviously, asterisks aside, and, we should be conscious and clever in that there are unexpected consequences. You could also be optimizing for your kid to be super autistic. And that's something that a parent has to kind of understand and calibrate, and that we have to be, I think, cautious as we employ this technology, which is there's always this balance in nature. Nature is never just it's just like not a one size solution here, if that makes sense.
Yes. I'm going to give you the last word, Delian, and then we're gonna cut this one. Thoughts on? I mean, like, what is any sort of what is a takeaway that you think just on the subject level, like people need to kind of keep in mind?
I think for me, it's just an excitement around, this type of accessibility on whole genome sequencing in terms of price point was literally only accessible. It became possible in like the past 12 months. And so
literally,
I think my takeaway would be that I hope people recognize that this is now a sort of tool in your tool set, and it's a tool that is relevant even if you're young and healthy, because it allows you to then just kind of focus in on the areas. Like if you're a healthy 22-year-old, you're like, well, man, do I really bother going for a liver screen or a stomach screen or XYZ organ, versus if you now have a whole genome that tells you, hey, you're actually highly, highly likely to have liver failure. Go take that to a genetic counselor. And now you can be okay, I can focus most of my sort of energy when I'm doing my annual screening on just monitoring basically my liver, sort of health. And that may sort of significantly improve your longevity. And so, the way that I describe it is for the first time, we have a bit of a Google Maps of your body, and people should just download that map and know what it is so that they're informed over the course of their, sort of life. And there's all these downstream other implications that I'm super excited about. But I think the most important thing to take away is if you're an audience member that's listening to this and you haven't ever done a whole genome sequence, there's a variety of providers. I'm obviously heavily predisposed to recommend, sort of Nucleus, but either way, you should find the map of your body basically.
And if you want to have kids, it's an obvious thing, right? If you want to have kids, you should know what you're a carrier for today. And if you want, you should also ask the person you're dating. I mean, that's the thing, an obvious thing you should do. If you're serious about getting married and having
First
kids,
date,
that's something you should
show
do.
me your DNA.
I mean,
I think
I
that should
don't
be
think
the
it's
norm.
out of the question. I don't think it's out of the question. Eventually, you have an integration of whole genome sequencing data with dating apps, and people can obviously, at their choosing, if they would like, to basically be opted out of being matched with someone who has also a carrier for a condition. I think that's in the individual sovereignty of the customer. So these are all things I think if you want to be healthy, live long, and have healthy kids, I think it's a must.
Thank you guys so much for joining. This was awesome. I have a million more questions. I'm going to have to bring you both back on to talk about them, especially the moon people. No offense. I know the health stuff, yes. And your company, amazing. But I have a lot of questions about the moon people. Talk to you guys later. It's been real.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, y'all.
All right. So we had a kind of fun political couple of days. We had AOC jumping around on stage to, who was it?
Enough by Cardi B. You're not
Cardi
familiar?
B, sort of panning out and seeing like not much of a crowd there. She's getting chased by a mob of pro-Palestine people, I think. Maybe that's a little bit of a exaggeration. Sanj will break it down in a second. And all of this is sort of like a last-ditch effort to save Bowman, who is the crazed squad member who pulled the fire alarm in the middle of a vote in Congress. And then that somehow wasn't a crime and nobody cared. We just kind of let it go. But I guess someone cared. His constituents cared. He just lost his election. There seems to be some sort of interesting leftist devouring leftist thing happening. Sanjana, can you break it down for us?
Well, I mean, Jamaal Bowman lost his primary in New York's 16th district, and it was kind of it wasn't really a landslide, but it was a pretty dramatic loss for Bowman. He lost to George Latimer, who I believe formerly represented that district in the New York State Senate. And, the squad sort of adjacent left is chalking this up to APEC contributions because APEC did pour, tens of millions of dollars into this race. I think it was like one of the costliest primaries of all time. But really, like Jamaal Bowman, from what I've been reading, is sort of seen among people who live in this district, which is basically Westchester County and then part of the Bronx, as kind of out of touch. And the sort of the symbol of this out of touchness was that he held this rally, which apparently wasn't even in the district. There's a map that shows sort of where his rally is and where his district is, and it's pretty far out. And it's like this expletive filled rally where he says, the South Bronx is going to show motherfucking APEC who's boss and all this shit. And the South Bronx is like a tiny, he's got like a tiny bit of the Bronx in his district, and it's not even the southern portion. So it's this kind of, insane thing for him to have said. But AOC did show up, and she, marches on stage and sort of does a little dance to Cardi B. There's like 50 people in the crowd.
Can I just say that she took her, I noticed she's doing this rally like, I'm gonna get in a fight right now.
Yeah.
But she lets her hair down. Like when you ever see a girl who's about to get in a fight, her hair goes up. It's like, it's a ponytail, it's tight, she's about to kill someone. AOC's impulse in a fight is to be like, look at my hair.
Hair down. Yeah. Yeah. No, it was all very performative. You couldn't really understand what she's saying because she's sort of screaming at the crowd like, we're gonna fight, and the crowd seems a little bit confused actually. I mean, it's like these sort of like stodgy middle-aged Democratic operatives who are like listening to this really vulgar Cardi B song, and meanwhile there is this concurrent protest being held by Within Our Lifetime, which is this very sort of radical pro-Palestine group that's chanting, AOC, your hands are dead, or sorry, AOC, your hands are red, 40,000 dead, or something like that. And apparently she was mobbed at her bus, which they graffitied afterward. But she did win her primary, it should be said, by a very sizable margin. I mean, there was very little money in that race, from what I've read, because it was kind of a foregone conclusion that she would win. But Bowman's loss, I think, is pretty remarkable because he was a rising star for a while. And then, the fire alarm antics happened. He did get away with, he was censored, I think, by Congress, but not really, he didn't really receive a punishment, I think, that most people would have.
I don't know if it's true. I was told as a kid, they were like, if you pull the fire alarm in a school, you're going to prison. Like that.
Yeah.
I remember being like a second grader. They're like, we will take you to jail. And we have like, we'll know who it is. There's like special dust on there. We'll get your fingerprints. Like, that's it. You're locked up for life. I lived in fear of the fire alarm, in fear. Because I always thought like, well, what if I think it's a fire? And then I pull it and then I go to jail. And I was wrong.
Yeah.
I totally have the same fears.
I think most people sort of pulling a fire alarm is it's almost like, to me, it's like that thing where people say, you could technically bite your finger off, but you've got this, mechanism in your brain that would stop you from, exerting the force necessary to bite it off. I feel like for most people, pulling a fire alarm, if there's no fire, is like biting your finger off. It's just your brain wouldn't allow you to do it. But Bowman's missing that.
There he was, just casually. And the pictures of it are really crazy. Like he's like, doop, like no big deal, and then lies about it. It's like, but we can see you. What is going on? And that is sort of that's such a good sort of metaphor for reality right now. It's like we can see it with our own eyes, and they're saying, no, you're wrong. You're that never happened. Martin, what's your take on this, or maybe Sandra, do you have a take before I say, would like Martin's opinion on this? Just like what is going on right now in general, do you think?
I guess I would say high level. I mean, Jamaal Bowman, I think, is like, he was an exceptionally bad candidate. There's I don't know. People are sort of saying this might be the death of the squad. And, I did think it was really funny that AOC gets mobbed by these Palestine people when she's probably the most, radically pro-Palestine, one of the most radically pro-Palestine people in Congress. And so I do think this kind of like irony of the far left devouring its children, like Saturn devouring his son, is sort of poignant and weird and funny. But I don't know, honestly, how much we can extrapolate from the Bowman stuff, because I just think he was like so widely disliked in this district where he was seen as like really out of touch.
I think there's some homeostasis, right? So like if an organism is sensing that it's killing itself or starving itself, it's going to modulate itself to get to a place where it can succeed. And if that means the Democratic Party, actually, I've seen a bunch of Republicans actually bemoan this, no pun intended, saying that they don't want this to happen because the Republicans are going to be less competitive. If you're I guess running against a bunch of crazies, you can kind of just not be crazy and win. And now it's sort of like, okay, if they're not going to have the AOCs, the Bowmans, the Tlaibs, et cetera, and we're going to have to run against like these very sober candidates that, could be inspiring in other ways, this is more competitive. And I think you're going to see both parties will sort of like try to like reach this equilibrium where they can be maximally competitive.
Yeah, I agree with that. I saw someone tweet something along the lines of the Democrats are getting very good at removing their crazies, and they were talking about Cori Bush specifically, who was the next one that seemed like she was having a hard time in her primary. This is the faith healer one of the squad. She's the one who believes that she cured someone's, I think, like cancerous wealth or something. It was her, which that endeared me to her. Honestly, I was like, and I also thought, because people were making fun of it, obviously online, how could you not? But I thought, like, one, I'm open. I would subscribe to the Faith Healer newsletter. I want to know more about what weird shit you think you can do. And number two, I think there are probably a lot of people who that resonated with, because she wasn't embarrassed about it. She wasn't joking about it. She was just like, I prayed to Jesus and this happened. And I think people underestimate how Christian many people are in the country. I don't know, weirdly, it was like one of the more endearing things that she's ever said, in my opinion. But having a hard time, and I agree with you, Martin, this for the Republicans is easy. You don't have to even talk about what Joe Biden is saying if you can just point to Rashida Tlaib, who Rashida Tlaib is like, I think most of the squad is not that. I think Rashida, like, full on would like us to be destroyed. I just genuinely feel that way. Whereas I think that like Ilhan Omar is kind of just this obnoxious. People are like, I don't think she's Muslim. I think that she's like, I really don't. I think that she's like a woke, like kind of college-y sort of American. I know that she's, from Somalia or whatever, but like, I think that she's super American. I feel that energy from her. She's like a woke American. And she's pretty good on free speech stuff. She has defended previously, like, during the January 6th thing, I remember her expressing some skepticism of what was going on. I thought that was admirable and atypical. And while I disagree with her on almost everything, I do respect someone who has values that they're committed to that are also, ostensibly pro-American, right? Like, we have a lot of people in tech who that hardcore free speech message resonates with, like the sort of like Edward Snowden camp. But Rashida's not that. And it's very easy to just put her up and be like, look what this person said about America. That's this guy. And if you lose that, well, that's going to be a harder race. But then I also don't know how they're going to in these like really, really left-wing places. Like AOC can't lose, right?
Right. But super quickly, when George Santos was sort of booted out of Congress, I thought I'd take his seat just for fun, just for like, until that as a partial, like instead of the full 2 years, it's just a partial like 6-9
What do you mean
months.
you thought wait, what is the story there?
Well, I actually looked into it because I know Santos a little bit. I wouldn't call us close friends or anything. And I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Let me be the congressman and I actually live in the district. Because of my probation or whatever, I have to live here. And I can't live in Manhattan. So I live in the district. I know the guy. It's like, look, this is easy. Everyone knows who I am. I'll go shake some hands and I'll win this thing. No problem. As opposed to these other two guys that nobody's ever heard of. And it turns out that they've made it almost impossible to run for Congress, especially in New York. So if they changed the rules during COVID, where if you can only go on the ballot if you're a Republican or Democrat functionally.
You're independent?
The hoops you have to go through as an independent are so tall, it's impossible. And it was really, really eye-opening because I actually went through the paperwork. I said, okay, I'll spend a little money on this. Let's see what happens. And they said, you need like 50,000 signatures, hand signed, notarized. And I was like, what the fuck?
We could have got Martin. We can get you 50,000 signatures. You had
to get it within like
a little grease into it.
This tiny like time frame, and like they have to be notarized or signed by a witness, and it has to be a registered voter. And it's like, Jesus Christ, like the person that actually gets to go and like 10,000 people voted to decide who's going to replace Santos. And, there was more work into just getting you on the ballot than actually running the election. So it'd be great if we could actually use technology instead of like, why can't we DocuSign this? I'm just sitting there like, am I really going to fake all these addresses?
I also just feel like, why is it necessary at all? Like, I think it'd just be easier to run. And maybe also, I mean, I wonder, could you have gone as a Republican a little bit? Is there a time frame that you have to have had? You had to have been a Republican for X amount of years, probably before.
The amount of rules that you have to check off is just like specifically made so that only political insiders could do this. If you're a guy that's just somebody off the street, there's no way you could do it. If you're a rich guy or gal, you could theoretically, if you hire the right people and plan this out years in advance, you could do it. But it really has to get easier because there's a lot of people that we'd love to see in Congress that just don't have that will to like go through every stupid check mark for months and months and months before you can even be on the ballot.
I've been thinking about this in a broader sense, just the rules of society and what they like the number of rules in society and what the outcomes sort of naturally are. And I think there's a business version of this as well, like a small business version of this. So to start like a food truck in San Francisco or something is so difficult to do. Like you're really killing all of these potential opportunities, and you're also kind of biasing the entire system in favor of a certain kind of person who has a lot of time on their hand and a lot of patience for bureaucracy, and so tends to like it. And so in politics, if you're weighing towards bureaucrats, just that's the first hurdle is like, do you have the tolerance for this level of bureaucracy? And if you do, come on in and create more of it. That's over time very crippling of just sort of new businesses, of the kinds of new ideas you might get in Congress. And it doesn't seem like we have a precedent for like a bureaucracy at scale. Democracy is pretty new, and just sort of historically, America's been around for a long time. And I keep wondering, is there a point where you get to this point where you just have so many rules that nothing is possible? Like you actually do just need like a reset of some kind. And it feels to me like we're very close to that. And I don't know what tips it over where we're like, okay, we got to get rid of, 90% of the rules that we have right now for everything, not just getting into office, but starting a company, even just like what you can do in your day-to-day life, right? I don't know. What do you guys think about that crazy idea that I just floated?
I love what you said about like the people who can tolerate bureaucracy end up being selected for. And the people who tolerate success get selected for business. They don't want to be anywhere near, a bunch of forms. And the DocuSign example is a really good example. You guys have invested in I don't know how many companies, but how many deals do you now see on DocuSign versus signed by paper and pen? They're almost, Sam Bankman filed for bankruptcy of FTX on DocuSign. Like it is the standard, kind of thing to do now. But for me, who I think would be like an overwhelming candidate, because just the name recognition alone, even if 70% of people hate me, 30% that love me will go to the polls, and everybody else won't go to the polls, and you'd win a landslide. And that's how Trump happens. And then you actually hear the message, you're like, hold on, I actually kind of like this guy, and you go from 70-30 to 50-50, and as long as your guys are energized, you can win. So I think that the only reason I wanted to do it is to sort of troll and say that I'm not going to quit my job, to be a congressperson. I'm just going to keep working as a software guy, and let me know when there's votes and stuff, and I'll vote when I need to, but I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing. And that's sort of where the way Congress was envisioned, actually, to begin with. So I think that the DocuSign test is actually a really good one, because it's sort of like it really puts up a gate of rationality of like, no, to enter this gate, you got to be really irrational, bureaucratic, and stupid. That's the only way you're coming in. And I looked at it like, I'm not fucking doing this. You got to be kidding me.
Thinking about California as this example of disgovernance, I think there is, California is massively mismanaged. Doing a deep dive into their budget right now, and they've just got this like massively underfunded pension liability. They just have closed their budget deficit, quote unquote, but like almost 40% of that closure is relying on deferring one-time spending, initiatives and things like these sort of gimmicky things. And I think that there's like a relatively high level of disgovernance and bureaucratic bloat that a population and kind of a civilization can tolerate. But I do think that at scale and on a long enough time horizon, the kind of, civil rot and social unrest that it promotes will ultimately undermine a democracy. And I think that like we saw a kind of low level instance of that during, Black Lives Matter and some of this kind of like massive looting that went unchecked. And we had, suspension of normal rules of law and order. And I wonder if, how, I almost think it would take a sort of massive social change that almost inevitably looks like violent revolution, unfortunately, for some of the bureaucracy. I don't know. I would like to think not. But when you've got such a sclerotic, sort of powerful bureaucracy that commands so much capital and has, monopoly over state violence, like, I don't know what the sort of outcome is. You can sort of chip away at it through reforms, but I don't know.
I agree. I'm laughing because it's like a crazy thing, but
yeah, no.
It's not that I'm saying we need a violent revolution, but I agree that like I don't know how else you get rid of this crippling, not just stifling, but literally crippling bureaucracy. You look at public transit in California, for example. We've talked about high-speed rail. We talk about law and order. Like these are things that actually people care a lot about. Like the idea of law and order, that is the social contract. If you're not protecting people from violence with your monopoly on violence, then you're not a legitimate government. And there's only so long that people, I think, will tolerate that. I think that probably the violence has to get worse that's happening to people, and then something is triggered. And it will feel something like a big reset of some kind. I do think we just need the expiration dates on laws would be helpful.
That'd be cool. I think idealism giving way to pragmatism is exactly what's happening. Bowman's idealistic, wow, I'm going to change the world. And people are like, well, this change is actually not great. And I want the police to protect me from being murdered.
Yeah, that is a great, I love the idea, the frame of idealism being replaced with pragmatism. I think that is actually just personally how I felt over the last 5 years or something. I've become super pragmatic. And I have these idealistic things that I care about. They're like my North Stars, libertarianism or something. But in terms of like what I want politically is I just want things to work. And that's really my bar is like, well, does this work or not? And if it's not working, that's a problem. I don't care what the ideology was behind it, or wouldn't it be nice if, does it work or not? It doesn't. Homelessness in San Francisco does not work. Great. What are some ideas for how to fix this problem? And if you're not coming at me with a solution, then I'm not supporting you in any way. In fact, I will oppose you with everything I have. If you're just talking about weird, stupid ideas, rather than like, how do we get these people off of the fucking streets? I don't want to hear from you anymore. My tolerance for that kind of talking it's zero. I have no tolerance left for that. My cup is full of bullshit. I cannot take any more. Speaking of more bullshit, this was a Trump one. Maybe it's not bullshit. It's an open-ended question. Let's see what you guys think.
Kind of bullshit.
It's sort of bullshit. Trump went on the all-in pod. Obviously, you have concurrently there's like the Will Stances of the world accusing people who want deportation of illegal immigrants of ethnic cleansing. So this is like the far left is saying like deportation is equivalent to literal genocide, and doubling down, tripling down. He's still talking about this. Trump, in their opinion, is like, the most anti-immigrant president of all time, and he's going to kill a bunch of people, 20 million. He'll be taking people who are not even immigrants. He's going to be going to people's houses who are American citizens and I guess shipping them to Mexico for some reason. But then Trump gets on the all-in pod and he's just like, I love immigration. And it's like, we gotta be a smart country. And we're going to do, he said, anyone with a college degree. Like he says, and he like goes back to, he's like, wait, anyone with a college degree, not even a 4-year degree, anyone who gets a 2-year degree in any subject, we're going to give a green card. We're going to give in America, which just to me sounds really stupid for many reasons, but maybe I'm wrong. Martin, what was your take on all that?
Yeah, I actually don't mind that. I'm a little bit different. I don't just believe every right-wing thing. So like I like kind of subscribe to most of it other than the immigration stuff. So I didn't mind it. It's not a huge issue for me. I do think we need population in our country. So it's not such a bad, terrible thing. It's better than population shrinking or dramatically shrinking. I think if people want to come to America, we should let them. But I do think that one of the things we have to remember about all presidents is that they don't know what they're talking about virtually everything. One of the things that came out of my Trump crypto thing was that Trump thought it was a metal coin that we wanted to launch.
I saw that text yesterday.
We explained to him it wasn't, or his son did. Very quickly, he said, "No, Dad, it's a crypto thing." And he's, "Oh, okay, got it," because there's already a Trump metal coin. And so again, I think he's a brilliant guy. And even Barron and I said that he said, Martin, if you gave him 2 pages about crypto that was just everything he needed to know, he would read it and just know it cold in 5 minutes. And I believe that. I can't blame a 78-year-old guy for not knowing the finer points of distributed ledger technology. And in fact, that's not what we vote for somebody to do. Or we'd vote for, Vitalik Buterin president. We vote for somebody who can make good decisions and hire people. So I think if this is the way he wants to go, I ride with it. And I don't think that, I do think you're right about like, okay, does 2 years getting an associate's degree, in history, does that earn you a green card? Does that a skilled worker? Probably not. But, I do think at the flip side, we shouldn't be, there shouldn't be no lottery for like math PhDs to like, pray that they could get into America.
Oh, I agree with that. But that's easy to say that I agree with that. Like, I think the bigger problem, so the campaign, it seems like, has been walking back that specific claim. But there's no value. It's like the earlier conversation we were having about what is the value inherent of the New York Times. I think the New York Times deserves a lot of the brand that it has for being excellent reporting, even though ideologically very different. But like a CNN, for example, like what is the value inherent of CNN versus Pirate Wires? And I just reject that completely. I don't think that they're better. College. What is the value inherent of a degree from the middle of the country in like sociology or something? And to me, it's like close to nothing. And what we really need are, if we're going to be bringing people in, I think that we should actually just ask ourselves, like, what do we need? And let's get a lot of them. I think there are laws in the books to limit the number of doctors we can bring in, for example. And it's like, just get rid of that shit. We should have unlimited doctors. We should have tons of doctors. We have a fucking health crisis in this country, and people can't find a doctor. We should have all of the doctors, for example, to start there. But what I don't want to do is create this weird, we don't need any more status associated with useless degrees. And Sajid, I believe you mentioned something a while ago when we were first, or a couple of weeks ago, when we were first talking about this. You talked about the overproduction of the elite and how this feels sort of linked to me, these two topics.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely, well, it's just another sort of, it adds even more elite cachet to, if the green card plan were to go through, it would add even more elite cachet to really non-elite degrees in the sense that they don't necessarily sort of map on to an elite skill set or even an elite sort of disposition in the sense of like a noblesse oblige kind of thing. But I think that, I mean, my thought with this, the reason I was so shocked by what Trump said is because it's green cards he was talking about specifically. I mean, green cards are a path to like citizenship, basically. It's permanent residency. Once you have a green card, you can stay in the US for the rest of your life. And I do think there's more sensible ways to do a kind of graduate visa. I mean, currently what we have with this insane sort of student visa system is you get an F1 visa and then you can apply for an extension to stay for another 24 or 36 months, depending on whether or not you're in STEM or not. But that's an arduous process. And, you know, England, for example, has a system where you can automatically convert a student visa to a 2-year visa while you look for a job or while you work, and then you can transition that to a skilled visa. Canada has a points-based system, you know, where different provinces can sort of decide, you know, what criteria they want in visa applicants, and are sort of ranked according to a much more logical system than what we have, which is like this bizarre lottery thing. And I think, to me, the green card stapled to your diploma and the lottery are kind of like on the same end of the insane spectrum. They're just sort of different ways of going about it. I mean, I think it's equally insane to say, okay, math PhDs have to go through this lottery where we're sort of picking names out of a hat and determining who gets to stay here and who doesn't. And it has nothing to do with whether or not you've got an amazing business idea or if you even have a job offer necessarily. As it is to say, you got a 2-year degree in sports management from a random university because your dad is maybe, I don't know, an Emirati mogul who wants, you know, somehow to have influence in American politics or whatever. That to me seems insane. And I think that, you know, obviously Trump was kind of speaking extemporaneously. So I don't know if that's really going to be, I think it's a mistake also. Having said all of that, I think it's a mistake to extrapolate too much based on like off the cuff comments on a podcast.
I think he's making the whole thing up as he went along.
Yeah, he's like Jason Calacanis. Yeah, Jason Calacanis just seemed like he wanted that. Trump was like, well, you got it, kid. It's all yours.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think, though, like many Trump things, he was hitting on, it's something you actually just sort of jogged this thought while you were speaking about the difference in different country systems on the college thing. Trump, as a more sort of America First nationalist type guy, is maybe hitting on a problem more than a solution with the proposed solution. And the problem that no one is really talking about at all is this use of American resources to train people from foreign countries that we then throw away. So there's this drain on our resources happening where it's like, you could either, there are two ways you could go about it. In his mind, it's like, well, let them all stay. But the other thing is like, we shouldn't have people over here and be putting resources into their education at the expense of an American if we're then just going to give them away. The problem is that, though, it's that resource drain. And I think that is true and an interesting way to think about it. And I don't think we're a more liberal country. And I mean that in the classic sense. So we don't think about like, well, what use is this to us very often? It's just like, well, it's freedom and anything goes. But yeah, there are resources that go into that. There is an opportunity cost when you're training a foreign resident who then certainly when you just automatically send them back. And that system is dumb. So it's like, I think he's right about
financial aid to, yeah. I mean,
that is for me, that is a red line. You're not getting money from us to do this. It's crazy that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Trump, I mean, I will say also like people are missing the broader context of that discussion too, where it was prefaced by Trump talking about his border wall and sort of, you know, his Remain in Mexico policy. And he was very, emphatic about the need to sort of reinstate a sane policy on the southern border. And so I think, you know, it's not as if the green card thing did kind of come out of the blue, but I do think like directionally the conversation was still like vintage Trump, sort of, you know, talking about, he mentioned the Remain in Mexico policy, which the Biden administration immediately scrapped and is arguably responsible for why we have this migrant crisis. And you know.
Well, I want to leave the last word to you, Martin. We had a crazy conversation today. We discussed the poly market stuff. We discussed just betting markets conceptually, UMA. We hit TechCrunch, insanity, all the genomic stuff. We have leftism devouring its own, and now border security, the border in general, asylum for sociology grads. I mean, could you connect all those dots? Probably not. But if you want to leave us with one thought, what is it?
Yeah, I think they all are sort of connected in a lot of ways where it's just poor critical thinking. Like you have to be able to take your time with some of these really hard to understand things, let your emotions sort of die down, and then think about what is the right thing or the wrong thing to do. In the case of poly markets, you have this like fast and rash sort of rush to judgment. The same thing happened with Bowman and the idealism of like, oh, this guy's promising a brave new world. I love it. And then you sort of sit there and say, wait a second, I didn't love this. I should have thought about this more. And, the same thing I think applies to TechCrunch where, you sort of hope and wish that you have this independent news, but then when you consider the source and realize that, these are folks that aren't thinking that hard about, what they're reporting about, they're thinking about reporting about the things they care about, and they're trying to see the world the way they wish it was, not the way that it actually is. And they're trying to mold reality and sort of distort it into what they want it to be. And so a lot of this comes from just like, sort of the Kahneman type heuristical errors where we just don't have, an easy way as humans to sort of distill all of reality and think about it carefully. And, it always comes from like just emotions and just sort of your brain playing tricks on you and wanting you to think something. And all of the mistakes I made in my life, all of them, which some people would say is like the encyclopedia of mistakes, is all the mistakes I've made in my life come from like a quick emotional response. And even this Trump thing, the Trump coin thing, it sort of came from this giddiness of, wow, we have this $400 million token and this crazy guy was betting us $100 million that it was fake. And I'm sitting here in the room with the guy. I know it's not fake. And I got so giddy that I like kind of over pushed this. And, again, we just have to be careful and slow and calm. And it's a lot harder to do that than it seems.
Word. I agree. Thank you so much for joining us. And to the rest of you guys, Pirate Wires is off next week for the 4th of July. We take the whole week off. It's one of 2 weeks we get off a year for America's birth, which happens to coincide with my own birth on the 1st. So send me birthday cards and gifts. It's been real. Rate, subscribe, review, leave a comment. Tell the world about the Pirate Wires Daily. Thank Martin for coming, and catch you guys in a couple weeks.